Hello Year 7s, it's Miss Montgomery here again. Welcome to Lesson 3 of Geography. So following on from our last lesson, I hope that you're all well and staying safe as we enter another week of this surreal time for us all. Don't forget, you can email me or any of your other teachers if you need any help with anything at all, work-wise, or if you're just feeling a little bit lost and you need to have a chat with one of your teachers. We are all here for you. Okay. So with this lesson in lesson 3, we're going to look at the effects of an earthquake in an LIC. So in the last lesson we looked at the effects of an earthquake in a HIC, and we used New Zealand as our case study. So today we're going to look at the effects of an earthquake in an LIC, and we're going to use a country called Nepal as our case study. So we're going to go through all what HIC, LIC means again, and we've got a little bit of a quiz of working out where Nepal is and different types of plate boundaries that create earthquakes. So what I want you to do first is I just want you to pause this video and answer the do it now question. Just spend a couple of minutes on this. I'm not expecting you to know all of them. You might not know any of them. It depends how much you've studied this before we broke up for lockdown. So just pause the video now, take a couple of minutes to name the type of plate boundary shown in each of the diagrams. You've got A, B and C here. Okay, pause the video, off you go. So you may have come up with some of them, you may not have come up with any of them, that's fine. We're going to go through all of them now. Now this is only going to be a brief introduction of the plate boundaries. And then what we'll look to doing is we'll look at doing a lesson later on that does all of these different plate boundaries in more detail. But just for the sake of this lesson, I just wanted to explain how an earthquake is created and giving you a brief explanation of the different plate boundaries. So A, plate boundary A. So you can imagine that these are the plates and the arrows are the direction that the plates are moving in. So A is what we call a constructive plate boundary. So the word constructive means something is created, something is built. Okay, just like with Lego, you would construct a model out of Lego. So you'll notice that the arrows are moving apart from each other. So that means that the plates are moving away from each other, which is allowing the magma or the lava to rise from under the earth up to the surface. These form what we call ridges, okay, and along the ridges is where volcanoes are formed. Then we've got B. So B is called a destructive plate boundary. So you'll see with the arrows that they are moving towards each other. Okay, that is the plates moving towards each other. Now, on the destructive plate boundaries, you have two plates. Quite confusing. We use a lot of the same words. We use plates, we use margins, we use boundaries. Okay, but what we have is we have the two main plates. Okay, this is the boundary or the margin, and these are the plates. One of them is an oceanic plate, and one of them is a continental plate. So the oceanic plate is the denser or the heavier plate, okay, and the continental plate is the lighter plate. So that what happens is when the two boundaries come together, when the two plates come together, because the oceanic plate is heavier, or we use the word denser, it goes underneath the continental plate. We call that subducted. Okay, so it subducts underneath the continental plate, which then pushes the continental plate to go up. So as the oceanic plate goes down, the continental plate goes up. And as it's that rubbing process of the continental plate scraping up the oceanic plate, that creates earthquakes. Okay, you'll also find that as the oceanic plate goes underneath or subducts under the continental plate, it actually warms up, and this pressure creates volcanoes coming through the continental plate. Okay, that's quite a lot of information for this lesson about these, but the destructive plate boundary, what you need to know about that is basically that it creates both earthquakes and volcanoes. Okay, and this is what we're going to be looking at today in the example of the Nepalese earthquake. And then C, so this image here, this type of plate boundary is called a conservative plate boundary. Okay, so the word conservative means something stays the same, you're conserving it. So in this boundary, the plates move side by side. You can see here. I did mention this one in the previous lesson because this is actually where the example of the New Zealand earthquake happened. So what happens is as the two plates move simultaneously together, they end up hitting each other and what's called a snag. And then at the point that they rub or they snag together, that creates pressure, which is called an epicenter, and that is where the earthquake starts. Okay, and so these ones, these conservative plate boundaries, they only have earthquakes there, no volcanoes. So I hope that's given you a little bit of an insight about plate boundaries, and we will come back to this and do a lesson on it. So just to confirm, you've got the constructive plate boundary, plates move apart, and that's where volcanoes are formed. It constructs the volcanoes. You've got the destructive plate boundary, okay, which is when the oceanic and the continental plates subduct, and that creates both earthquakes and volcanoes. So you think it's quite destructive to the land. Okay, the word destructive there is destroying it. And then you've got the conservative plate boundary where they are rubbing against each other, which only creates earthquakes. So we're going to look at a situation or an earthquake that happened on a destructive plate boundary in this lesson. So we're going to look at the effects of an earthquake on a low-income country. So that will be a poor country. Okay, we're going to, and why are we doing it? Well, again, we want to be thinking about the ESE effects. So how does this affect the environment? How does it affect social? And how does it affect the economy? And we're going to be getting there by doing the same thing that we did in last lesson. So we're going to sort out the primary and secondary effects, and we're going to answer an exam question. We have got a video to watch as well, and I'm giving you quite a lot of the effects that are coming from it because I want to give you as much information as I can so that you can answer the exam question well. Not like the other lesson where I got you to write down loads yourself. So you're still going to write down loads yourself, but I'm going to talk you through it. Okay. Oh, my answer's already come up there, unfortunately, for the continent one. So the continent that Nepal is in is Asia. Okay. If you didn't get that, then unfortunately, Miss Montgomery is not fantastic with her animations. What type of plate boundary is that? Well, we've just said it's a destructive boundary. So what I want you to do now is I want you to, again, draw this table, okay, on your paper using a ruler again, and I want you to complete it whilst watching this video. It might also be good if you get a couple of different coloured highlighters or pens if you have them, and you can just put whether you think an effect is an environmental effect, a social effect, or an economical effect. And the easiest way of doing that is just putting an E and an N for environmental, S for social, and an EC for economical. Okay, so I'm just going to start this video. What I would like you to do is, if you cannot hear the video, then feel free to YouTube it and to do it and just pause my lesson. Okay, I'll also put subtitles on for you. And whilst you're watching the video, it doesn't actually show you footage of the earthquake actually happening. Like we saw in New Zealand, this is slightly different. This will show you after it. And I think that's quite telling. I want you to think about, well, why? Why is it not showing us about the earthquake happening? Maybe it's not been covered by the news. Maybe people don't have phones. Okay, so I want you to start thinking about, well, the questioning why we haven't got the full feature that we did have about New Zealand? Okay, year seven, so I'm going to leave the video there. So the next activity that I want you to do then is I want you to we're going to go through some effects together as a group. And I just want you to be thinking about things that you might think that were similar. Okay, so things that you thought were the same in the New Zealand earthquake and the Nepalese earthquake, and then also things that were differences. Okay, so notice some differences, because all of those things are what's going to help you to answer your exam question. So I'm going to go through some different effects, and I want you to be filling in your columns. Are they primary effects or are they secondary effects? Okay, so remember, just as a quick recap, a primary effect is something that happens immediately. Okay, and then a secondary effect is something that happens usually because of the primary effect in the first place. So I have also separated these into social, economic, and environmental. Okay, just so you are thinking about the ESE impacts. So the earthquake killed nearly 9,000 people, injured another 23,000 people. So at any point, you can press pause on my lesson to help you fill in your table. Okay, there were over 500,000 homes destroyed, which made people homeless. Countries around Nepal also suffered, such as India, where there were 67 deaths and 300 people injured. So that just shows that this earthquake was so large that it actually reached another country, a surrounding country. Okay, and that was different to the one in New Zealand. The one in New Zealand, it only really affected the one city, Christchurch. Okay, but still, a lot of people were dead, a lot of people were injured. So there's a similarity there, but the numbers are different. Okay, nearly 9,000 people, okay, have been killed by the Nepal earthquake. That was a massive difference to the 65 in Christchurch. So economic effects then, in Nepal, over 7,000 schools were destroyed, which causes a loss of education and development of the country. Okay, so what that means, development means, so to build up a country, to build infrastructure or to create jobs, or basically create healthcare. So because there's a lack of education, that will then stop people from being able to get better lives and build a better life for the country. So these two here would be secondary effects of the schools being destroyed. After the earthquake, 90% of the tourist booking were cancelled, which caused a $600 million loss. So because people didn't want to come to Nepal because it was unsafe, or there was not really any infrastructure, not really anything to go and see, a lot of tourists cancelled their trips. And then a country like Nepal actually the economy relies a lot on people coming in and spending their money in that country as tourists. So this would be a secondary effect from the earthquake. Environmentally, throughout this region, there were multiple landslides and earth shifts, which then had a follow-up problem to things like death and burst water mains. Okay, and that meant that raw meat and chemicals had been leaking out into the river, killing fish stocks and potentially people. So a lot of people in Nepal would use rivers for bathing and for washing and maybe even for drinking. And so if a lot of these chemicals and raw meat and sewage is getting into that river, that's contaminating all of that water. So I just want you to pause the video now and make sure you've got all of these written down and put them in the correct column. I'm going to go through a few more effects with you on the next slide, and then I'm going to leave it up to you to answer the exam questions. So please pause the video now. Okay, year 7, so I've just got a few more effects to give you. And just in case you haven't been able to think of too many yourself. Okay, so primary effects, something that happens immediately. So we've got people dead and people injured, homes have been destroyed, schools have been destroyed, and a lot of rural villages were blocked. Okay, that's quite an important one because the actual earthquake in Nepal was so big that it affected the entire country. So lots of people live up in the mountains in what we call rural villages. Okay, so if something's rural, it means that there's not really many buildings, there's not really any sort of business or trading going on, there's not very many schools. It's a bit like farmland. Okay, it's just fields everywhere. There might be the odd couple of buildings, there might be one hospital for about 20-mile radius or something like that, and same with a school. So the secondary effects are things that happened because of the primary effects. People were living in temporary accommodation. So if it's temporary accommodation, it means it's not going to it's not going to be good for them to live in that for a long time. So usually temporary accommodation is like a tent. Okay, so you could imagine you can't really live in a tent for very long. There's a lack of sanitation, so that means like hygiene, clean water, access to clean medicines and to clean clothes, maybe sanitary products for women. Okay, so there's a lack of that, and so therefore there's a lot of diseases that could come. A loss of education, because we spoke about the schools being destroyed, and we saw on the video that the whole schools were destroyed, so lots of classes, the children, when they're not getting their education. And then also they were unable to get aid to people in rural areas. So that big van on the video wasn't able to get up some of the roads just because the roads were destroyed. And so when we talk about aid, we're talking about everything from fresh, clean water, food, medicines, just healthcare and clean clothes, just things that will aid you to have a nice, comfortable life. Okay, but these people were not able to get it to people in the rural areas because of the effects of the roads being blocked. Okay, feel free to pause the video there and write a note of that. Okay, so apologies for another exam question, year 7s, but again, this is something I'm trying to get you started with, because there will be quite a lot of this as you go through your learning journey at St Leonard's Academy. Okay, and it's all about training you, not just for your exams, your GCSEs, but also getting you to really start thinking about two sides of different arguments all the time, and then putting your opinions into it. Okay, so if you'd prefer to write this in like a newspaper article, that's absolutely fine as well. Okay, but try to only spend about 25-30 minutes writing this essay question or this exam question. You don't have to write loads. You'll notice that I've put a 6 here instead of a 4. So in the lesson last week, it was worth 4 marks, but this one is worth 6 marks, and that's because I've changed the command word. Okay, so this is interesting. So I'm going to go through the bug technique with you again and explain what that is. So my advice to you would be to write down this question. So listen to how I've broken it all down first, and then pause the video and then write it down. So the first one to do is to box the command word. So we've got compare here. Okay, so in last lesson you were looking at describe. Describe is just say what you see. Okay, whereas compare, you now need to be looking at the two different countries. You need to be looking at the things that were similar, and you need to be looking at the things that were different. Okay, there's quite a lot here. You then also need to be looking at things that were similar for the primary effects and things that were different for the primary effects, and then things that were similar for the secondary effects and things that were similar or different for the secondary effects. That's how you are going to build up the web of your argument, and that is where you will be getting your full marks from. Okay, you underline the key word. So again, using 2 case studies. So again, you need to make sure you are writing the examples down. So you need to make sure you include the country names, New Zealand and Nepal. Effects, we're not talking about causes and we're not talking about how they respond. We are talking about the effects, so the primary and the secondary effects. And then we've got LIC and HIC. So this is where you can look at using your command word to look at the differences and the similarities between these 2 types of country. Okay, so again, you'll see here we've got a success criteria. This is what we would use, the teachers would use as a little tick sheet. Okay, so it's a little bit of like a tip to leave it here for you, because then you know, have you included all of these? Have you included examples? Does your answer link to the question? So have you compared it? Have you spoken about both of these? Have you included differences and similarities? And have you used keywords? I will leave some sentence starters up again, like I did before. Feel free to use them. Okay. But if you don't want to use them, if you feel confident, that's absolutely fine. So as an example, and you can use these as quite loosely and decide to change some of the words around. It's entirely up to you. These are just here to support you if you need them. So the earthquake which happened in an LIC such as, and that's when you would write Nepal, okay, had different effects to that which happened in a HIC such as New Zealand because, okay, you might then want to bring in that there is maybe it was a bigger earthquake in Nepal, so it affected more people, it affected rural areas, whereas the one in New Zealand was a lot smaller and it was contained within a city. Okay, so these is where you start building the story of your answer. So one primary effect of the Nepal earthquake was, and again, you can go back and use my table or your table. This led to the secondary effect of, so remember we're talking about something that happens immediately and how that then leads into something else. This was different or similar to an effect in New Zealand, such as, so you could talk about here a primary effect being death. Okay, you could talk about a primary effect in New Zealand, similar, also being death. Okay, but then you might want to argue, well, actually, the death rate is different. The number of people that were dying is different. Why do you think that might be? And then at the end, I just again want you to put your own opinion into your answer, because this is your work at the end of the day. So I want this to be coming from you. So the last sentence that I would write in the bottom of my answer would be, I think that the primary or the secondary effects were worse in Nepal or in New Zealand because. Okay, and maybe just answer that and just maybe put a sentence or just a few words. Why do you think it may have been worse? The secondary effects may have been worse in Nepal, for example, or the primary effects may have been worse in New Zealand. Whatever you think, I want to have your opinion in that. So that's basically all you've got to do. If you would like to put that into a newspaper article instead of writing another exam question, that's absolutely fine. Obviously, it may not be worth the full 6 marks unless you have a similar kind of structure where you have all of this included. But if you can be creative, make it catchy, or if you just really want to get right into that argument and looking at it from both sides, just remember this command word here is to compare something. Okay, so you are looking at both the similarities and the differences between the 2 countries and the effects of their earthquake. And if you need any help with that at all, you can email me. My email address is re.montgomery@hassler.org.uk. You can email, if I'm not your geography teacher, you can still email me, or you can email your geography teacher. Okay, and if you need any help with anything else, then please, please, please do stay in touch with us. We are here for you. We are all still working. And yeah, good luck, and let me know, email it over when you have finished. Yeah, take care, and I hope you enjoy, and take care of yourselves and your families, and hope to see you soon, year sevens. Bye bye.